There is a pain no one sees. It's when you're hurt by the very person you once trusted most, and they walk away as if they've done nothing wrong. They laugh, they live, they post their happy moments on social media. Meanwhile, you're alone, sitting with hundreds of questions and no answers. And yet, you choose the unexpected. You don't retaliate. You say nothing. You disappear quietly. And it is that silence that begins to change the course of their life. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes, fairness arrives in silence in the form of unnamed lessons they must face on their own. Stoic philosophy teaches us this. You cannot control the actions of others, but you always control how you respond. And sometimes, the strongest response is no response at all. Because silence is not weakness. It's the choice of someone who knows their worth and refuses to let pain turn them into someone they're not. This is when you step into the quiet strength where justice needs no sound, only the peace you choose to protect. And that is exactly what we're going to explore in the next part. 1. They didn't lose you. They lost the peace you carried with you. Not everyone who leaves your life creates a void. But you're different when you go silent, when you withdraw, when you disappear without a goodbye or warning. The void begins to echo. What unsettles them isn't that you're gone, it's how strangely chaotic things became the moment you left. Because you weren't just someone who showed up. You were a space, a place where they felt safe enough to be themselves, even if they never said it aloud. The one they called when their heart felt heavy for no reason. The one who knew when to step back, when to stay silent, when to listen when no one else cared what they had to say. But because you weren't loud, because you didn't demand, because you didn't perform, they mistook you as ordinary. That was their first mistake. You were the one who calmed their storm when they lost direction. The one who gently gathered their broken pieces with patience, a soft gaze, and answers that never needed to be shouted. But they grew so used to your presence, they assumed it would always be there. And like everything we take for granted, they didn't value it until it was gone. The truth is, they didn't lose you. They lost something priceless you brought with you. They lost the sense of peace only you could give. They lost the clarity in simple conversations. They lost a kind of love that was pressureless, unrushed, and unconditional. They lost a presence that made everything around them feel less demanding, less negative, less chaotic. Don't be mistaken. They may never admit it. They'll keep living. They'll post new pictures. They'll say they're fine. But the truth is, some things are felt most clearly only when they're no longer there. And the peace you once brought is one of them. It leaves no scars, no trace, but a quiet and deep emptiness, one nothing else can fill. They might be with someone new, in a relationship full of passion, laughter, and flair. But there will be days, after the laughter fades and the noise dissolves, when they'll look around and realize no one really understands them. No one truly makes them feel at ease when there's nothing left to say. No one truly makes them feel like home instead of someone they have to escape from. Only in your absence will they begin to see just how much space you once held in their life. And the most painful part, they won't realize it while you're still there, but only after you've walked away for good. There's a Stoic truth worth pondering. We value things when they're gone because we never learned to be present while they were here. We often don't recognize what's precious until it's lost. Not because we didn't love enough, but because we lived too fast, too unaware, too dismissive of stillness. You were the one who brought that stillness into their life. Not through grand words, but through your steadiness, your gentle eyes, your quiet presence that never needed to be the center. You made them feel whole without saying a word. But they confused calm for dullness. They mistook steadiness for lack of spark. They misread peace as boredom, and they left in search of something stronger, more exciting, less like you. Until they realize not everyone makes breathing easier, like you once did. Not everyone understands them before they speak. Not everyone accepts their unfinished self without fixing, controlling, or owning. And by the time they realize that, they'll face another truth. You're no longer there to return to. You don't hate. You don't resent. You walk away with the calm of someone who knows true value, needs no loud approval. You make no noise. You don't prove a point. Because you know peace needs no advertisement. It only needs to be present. And once it's gone, people come to know what they've lost. You didn't hurt them. You didn't wish them pain. You simply withdrew the light that quietly kept them from falling apart. And when the darkness returns, they'll understand that light was never from outside but from you. A light not blinding, but steady enough to keep a soul from slipping into the abyss. So don't feel guilty if your absence confuses them. Remember, you didn't take your presence, you took back the peace they once failed to cherish. And that, above all else, is what they'll remember when they can't seem to find it anywhere else. 2. You don't need revenge. Their own mind will punish them. There is a kind of justice that needs no gavel, no trial, no audience. It happens quietly in the deepest part of a person, the mind. And sometimes the heaviest punishment someone can endure isn't an external loss. It's the weight of being trapped with themselves. You don't need to speak. You don't need to expose anyone. You don't need the world to know you are betrayed, disrespected, or abandoned without reason. Because there will come a time when they'll have to live with what they've done, not because of your actions, but because of their mind's reaction to your silence. There are nights when every light is off, when the laughter of social media no longer echoes, when there's no one to talk to impress, to distract them. That's when they'll face themselves. And in that silence, questions will emerge unprovoked, uninvited. Why did I do that? What did I lose? And the scariest part, they won't have an answer. I once watched a man hurt a gentle, unusually patient woman. She never screamed, never showed anger, never posted emotional quotes. She simply withdrew calmly, clearly. At first, he didn't care, but months later, he started telling friends he couldn't sleep well, had strange dreams, kept seeing her image in unexpected places. He couldn't explain why someone he thought was forgettable lingered in his mind, but I knew why. It wasn't memory, it was punishment. Not all punishment is external. Guilt is invisible, but real, and it eats slowly from within. The human mind has its own memory. It needs no summons, no courtroom, just time. And time always works quietly but precisely. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach us to hate, and it certainly doesn't encourage revenge. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Which means revenge is not about doing what they did, it's about becoming someone they could never be. You refuse the same cycle. You choose dignity. And that's exactly why they can't escape the feeling of losing, even though you never had to prove a thing. Because you see, they're not afraid of your exposure. They fear your silence. They don't fear your anger. They fear your calm. They don't fear you calling them out. They fear you never mentioning them again. Because when you go quiet, when you fully walk out of their life without leaving a trace of emotion, they no longer know where they stand in your story. And that void that is the torment. The punishment of conscience doesn't arrive with a shout. It comes in harmless moments when they hear a song you once listened to together. pass by a place you both visited, stumble on a quote about loyalty, and everything they tried to forget plays back like a slow reel. They can't erase it. They can't mute it. Because it's no longer a memory, it's a piece of themselves stuck where you once stood. You don't need to witness their downfall to believe justice exists. Sometimes the fairest outcome is them having to chew the consequences alone, unseen. It's an invisible isolation, a nameless unrest, a quiet anxiety from not knowing why they no longer feel at peace. They'll blame the world, the timing, new people, but deep down, they'll know. They'll know someone once lit up their life, and they were the one who turned off the light. And you? You don't need to wonder whether they regret it. You don't need to check if they're doing well, because you're living truly, healing fully, and becoming the person you always deserved to be. No victory is louder than your peace, your clarity, your freedom from bitterness. That isn't just liberation, it's justice for you. 3. Life doesn't retaliate, it reorders. When someone hurts you, the human instinct is to want to see them pay, to want justice to be served clearly, swiftly, to see something happen to them not out of hatred, but because you need to know your pain wasn't ignored. But then time passes, and nothing happens. They go on living, laughing, being loved, succeeding. And you begin to wonder, is life truly unfair? Can people do wrong and just keep going as if nothing terrible ever happened? But this is where we often misunderstand the nature of justice. Life doesn't retaliate, it holds no grudge, it doesn't rush. Because it doesn't operate on emotion, it runs on principle. And principles don't move quickly, they move accurately. Stoic philosophy teaches us the universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. This means life does not bend to our emotional impulses. It moves in the way it must to restore balance. It doesn't punish wrongdoers on your schedule, but it never forgets to set what's crooked back in order. The imbalance in morality, in trust, in kindness, no matter how small, always sends out a ripple. And the universe will find a way to correct that ripple, not by punishing anyone, but by removing what no longer aligns, redirecting what no longer belongs, and closing the doors that should have been shut long ago. It happens quietly, and that's why it works. You won't see a sentence handed down. You won't see someone lose everything overnight. But if you watch long enough, if you stay still enough to look beneath the surface of life, you'll notice this. Those who once exploited kindness, betrayed genuine love, or disregarded the presence of good people gradually, their lives grow colder, more chaotic, craving a peace they once had but can no longer find. An old friend of mine once said, "I don't understand why everything's slipping through my fingers lately. My relationships feel shallow. Every opportunity comes and goes. It's like life is pulling something back from me, but I can't see what. I didn't need to say anything, because I knew life was simply rearranging what he had once taken for granted." He had been with a kind, patient woman who loved him with quiet sacrifice. But he didn't value it. He left, not for any clear reason, but because he believed he could find something better. Now, amid countless choices, he feels connected to no one. There is no peace left to anchor him. That's not karma. That's the restoration of order. When someone disrupts balance, be it trust, love, or loyalty, the system will self-correct. That person will lose what once held their life steady. And they won't understand why the things that used to flow smoothly now turn difficult. But deep down, they know they broke something sacred. And now, life is quietly cleaning up the pieces. The beauty is, You don't have to be the enforcer. You don't have to interfere. All you need to do is step back and live in alignment with your values. Because when you do what's right, stay honest, avoid reacting with bitterness, and refuse to become cruel, you become an anchor of balance in the universe. And the rest, life will handle. Seneca once wrote, "Time discovers truth." Time not only reveals others to us, it reveals them to themselves. And sometimes, time is what makes them realize they didn't just lose a good person, they lost the grace that person carried. One day, in the middle of calculated relationships, joyless parties, and hollow successes, they will remember you not because you were loud, but because you made them feel calm. And that is something they will never find again in anyone else. You don't need to see that moment. You don't need them to realize it. What matters more is that you didn't let the wound change who you are. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't play dirty. You didn't become a bitter version of yourself. And that is the clearest proof that you have already won. Victory is not when the one who hurt you falls. It's when you no longer need them to fall in order to feel whole. It's when you move forward calmly, steadily, and without looking back. Life doesn't need to strike back. It just needs to restore the right order. And those who no longer align with the light will eventually be pushed out of it, not through anger, but through a stillness that cannot be undone. 4. The universe withdraws with precision. Life doesn't always knock loudly. The most important changes rarely arrive with warning, noise, or chaos. They come in silence, retreating from the places no longer worthy. And in that subtle realm, the universe moves with deliberate quiet. You won't see lightning strike when someone treats you poorly. You won't hear a loud crack when a relationship drifts from truth. But if you're quiet enough to notice, you'll see. Doors start to close. Opportunities begin to slip away. People who once stood beside them slowly drift apart, and everything stops flowing as easily as it once did. This isn't magic. It's the quiet intervention of the universe when someone touches something sacred they should have cherished. Loyalty, kindness, trust, genuine love. These are energies that cannot be endlessly exploited without consequence. And when they are betrayed, life doesn't need to get angry. It simply withdraws what was once gifted. There is a kind of punishment that doesn't come from the outside, but from losing the company of the sacred. When you lose the invisible shelter that once surrounded you, life starts to feel colder. Not the weather, but the energy. Not people, but the atmosphere. Those who once connected with you authentically feel distant. Doors once open feel closed. What once flowed smoothly becomes inexplicably blocked. Seneca once said, "Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling." When you live in truth, the universe leads. When you betray what is right, it doesn't punish, it retreats. And that retreat is the restoration of order. I once knew a man successful, charismatic, admired. He had it all, a great career, loyal friends, a deeply forgiving wife. But he believed he deserved more. So he betrayed it all, not because he had to, but because he thought good things would remain, no matter how he behaved. At first, nothing seemed to change. He was still invited to events, still surrounded by admirers, still succeeding, but piece by piece, the core began to unravel. His wife left him quietly, without bitterness. True friends grew distant. Business partners stopped calling. And one day, standing in a crowded room, he realized no one was truly looking at him anymore, and it was already too late. That wasn't a collapse. It was the universe's graceful withdrawal. No drama, just a separation so skillful that no one could blame anyone or name the reason, but the emptiness was undeniable, and the support he once felt was gone. When you lose a good person, you lose more than a human being. You lose the spiritual space they brought with them. You lose an energy that once kept your life in balance. And when that disappears, life doesn't necessarily fall apart, but it loses ease, flow, and the grace you'd grown used to. So if the person who once hurt you now feels as though luck is leaving them, that nothing fits the way it used to, that new relationships lack real connection, it's not because you cursed them. It's because the universe no longer supports them. Not because you want them to suffer, but because the universe stops uplifting a soul that wounded what was meant to be protected. You don't need to watch them fail. You don't need to wait for them to fall. Your quiet, decisive departure without looking back already began a precise reordering. And your peace, your refusal to be poisoned by the past, is the loudest declaration that you've risen above the chaos. You are not the hand of justice. You are the one who lives rightly, and that is enough. The universe doesn't need a scream to begin its adjustment. It only needs an energetic misalignment. And when that occurs, whatever no longer belongs to the light will quietly fall into shadow. Not by fire, but by absence, an absence that cannot be reversed. 5. They are being reflected through a different version of themselves. There is a form of punishment that doesn't come from the outside, nor does it require a third party. It comes from within, when life starts bringing new people into their world who are not much different from who they once were. Not to love, but to reveal who they used to be. Some call it karma, but in truth, it's the pure reflection of nature. What you plant, you live inside the frequency of that seed. When you betray, you attract those who know nothing of loyalty. When you lie, you're surrounded by falsehoods. When you toy with someone's feelings, you'll find yourself in relationships that keep you perpetually uneasy. Not because anyone cursed you, but because you taught life how to treat you. Stoicism does not believe in revenge. It trusts in natural consequence. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What injures the hive injures the bee." When you disrupt the harmony of the whole, you drain the harmony within yourself. And then you don't need anyone to hurt you. Life itself will let you feel what you once made someone else endure. I once listened to the story of a man who coldly walked away from a woman who had loved him wholeheartedly. He thought she was too sensitive, too vulnerable, too needy. He believed he needed someone stronger, less emotional, more rational. That's what he told himself. He left without a trace of regret. A year later, he began dating someone completely different, independent, assertive, unattached. At first, it felt refreshing. Until he realized he was in a relationship where emotions were controlled, where he constantly felt inadequate, where he couldn't reach the emotional depth he once had but had taken for granted. He said that every time he was ignored, every time his messages went unanswered, every time his attempts to connect were met with silence, it hurt in a way that felt strangely familiar. Just like the hurt his former partner must have felt when she was with him. And in that moment, he wasn't angry at his new partner anymore. He was startled by the truth. He was now in love with his former self, only in another form. When you don't learn the lesson, life will teach it again, but this time, you'll stand in the other person's shoes. And nothing stings more than being hurt by the old version of yourself. Not because it's too toxic, but because it's too familiar. So familiar you can't blame anyone else. You can only look at it and admit, I was once like this. Some have to be ghosted a few times to understand the pain of silence when you need answers most. Some have to love someone cold to feel the emptiness of a bond without real connection. Some must have their enthusiasm crushed to realize they once did that to someone who gave them everything. And they come to a bitter realization. No one else did this to them. It was them placed in the same position as the person they once hurt. The universe doesn't retaliate. It reflects, and given enough time, that reflection becomes crystal clear. You don't need to stand there pointing fingers. Life itself will lead them to the mirror. And in that moment, they won't see you anymore. They'll see themselves. One day, when they feel constantly doubted, always explaining themselves, constantly being judged, they will remember you. Not because they still love you, but because they finally understand. When their new partner doesn't hear them speak, doesn't see the sadness in their eyes, doesn't catch the subtle signals they once ignored in you, they'll realize they once stood in that exact spot, and they failed to listen. You don't need to answer those questions for them. You don't need to show up to witness their awakening. Because once they're truly awake, their own inner voice will speak. They'll begin piecing everything together. And there is no reckoning more brutal than realizing, I did to someone else exactly what I can't bear being done to me. There is a kind of regret that comes without tears. It arrives in sleepless nights, in empty embraces, in relationships that never feel real. It comes when you're with someone, yet feel utterly alone, and suddenly remember that you once made someone else feel that way. That's not punishment, it's reflection. A reflection deep enough to turn recognition into transformation. A lesson expensive enough that no one wants to repeat it, and if they are brave enough to face it, they'll change. If not, they will live in the loop forever, always choosing the wrong person, never finding true connection, endlessly asking, why don't I feel enough? The answer has always been in the mirror, and the person they'll see is themselves. 6. You don't need to witness it, because you've already moved on. There is a kind of liberation that doesn't come from winning, but from no longer caring who wins. You don't need a front row seat to watch life teach them a lesson. You don't need to witness their outcome to believe in justice, because when you've truly moved on, you no longer need proof. Maybe you once thought, I wish I could see them go through what I did. That's a deeply human response. But over time, you begin to realize, if you're still watching them, you're still standing there in the old wound, in the old cycle, in a life that's no longer yours. You don't need to see them fall, because you've already risen. You don't need to hear an apology, because you've already forgiven, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. And you don't need them to understand your pain, because you no longer live to be understood, you live to be at peace. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, how much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? We are rarely wounded by what happened, but by our attachment to how it should have ended. But once you truly let go, you realize you don't need to know if they regret it, if they've changed, if they've paid the price. The only thing you need is to keep going without bitterness. They may awaken one day or not. They may be betrayed in return or continue living inside their illusion, but that no longer matters because you are no longer vibrating at that level. You have healed. You have moved on. And the most beautiful part is this. You didn't become them, even though you had every reason to. You don't need to hear the words they never said. You don't need anyone to validate that you were right. You already have the strongest validation. You were not hurt so badly that you lost your essence. You still have kindness despite betrayal, patience despite trials, faith despite being taken for granted. And if anyone ever needs to know how strong you are, this is your answer. Moving on doesn't mean you no longer feel. It simply means the feeling no longer controls you, and when you're strong enough to stop checking what's happening in their world, you'll know you are finally free. Some battles aren't won with force. They're won with stillness. You don't need to speak, don't need to prove, don't need to argue. You only need to keep living fully, deeply, without turning back. They are no longer the next chapter of your story. They're just a page you finished reading and culled with quiet gratitude. Not because they deserve your thanks, but because through them you realized you deserve better. 7. Your rise is their ending. There is a kind of ending that doesn't come from collapse, but from the unwavering silence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. When you no longer react, no longer expect, no longer need them to see the change in you, that is when you have truly risen. Not to get revenge, but to become the version of yourself they'll never reach again. True growth is not loud. It doesn't show up on social media, doesn't need to announce achievements, doesn't need to flaunt a life that's moved on. It shows in the calmness in your eyes when you speak of what once hurt you, in the way you smile when talking about those who once made you cry, in your presence whole, complete with not a single part of you needing validation from anyone. They don't know how many sleepless nights you endured, how many times you held yourself back from texting, how many moments you almost went back just because you felt weak. They didn't see the quiet effort it took to stop your wound from turning into a bitter scar. But now, they will begin to feel it. Not through your words, but through the feeling that they can no longer reach you even when you're standing right in front of them. And that's when everything in them begins to fall apart. Because they weren't prepared for a version of you that doesn't need them, that isn't waiting for an apology, that isn't hoping they'll admit their wrongs. They once believed you'd always be there like an anchor that never leaves the shore. They believed you were the soft one, the forgiving one, the one too scared to walk away. But now, they're faced with something more terrifying than anger: your peace. Stoic philosophy once emphasized, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And you have become the master of yourself. You're not living to be someone else's lesson. You don't need them to fall to feel your worth. But what they never expected is this: that your ability to walk on without them is the very truth that hurts them the most. Maybe you're not wildly successful, not famous, not someone the world applauds, but you have what they can't buy: peace of mind. You sleep well. You don't have to perform. You don't need someone else to feel enough. And while they're still chasing something to fill the emptiness, you've stopped needing anything to feel whole. One day, they'll look back, not with loud regret, but in quiet moments when life is no longer thrilling, when new people don't go deep enough, when loneliness begins to take shape. They'll think of you, not because you still matter, but because you became the standard they'll never find again. And they will realize you were the peace they rushed to leave, the loyalty they traded for novelty, the light they thought they could easily replace. But now, around them, there's only artificial light, beautiful but cold, bright but empty. You don't need to know whether they think of you, because the fact that you no longer care is the clearest sign you've risen above the old story. And for the one who once hurt you, nothing is more brutal than being left out of the journey they could have walked with you. Not because you shut them out, but because they left when your arms were still open. True punishment is not the loss. It's realizing what was lost when it can no longer be reclaimed. You don't need to beat them. You just need not to let them pull you down. And once you've done that, you've already risen above it all. Not through confrontation, but through transcendence. You chose healing over victory, self-mastery over control, dignity over bitterness. And that is the most beautiful ending for you, but the quietest one for them. Because nothing hurts more than watching you shine with no space left for them in your light. I used to think justice had to be loud, had to make a statement, had to bring the one who hurt you to their knees for things to feel balanced. But then I realized The deepest form of justice doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. It's when you no longer need them to fall, when you no longer wear your old pain as part of your identity, when you can speak of what once broke you without trembling. I don't write these words to make you hold on to resentment or to hope for someone's downfall. I write them so you see this. You don't need anyone to pay for you to feel worthy. The very fact that you've held on to your kindness, that you chose healing over harming others, that is already your greatest victory. No one needs to know what you've endured. You only need to know this. You didn't betray yourself, and that is enough. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future content. Because sometimes, you don't need to say a word. Your quiet growth is the loudest sound they'll ever hear. See you in the next video.